had about this. So it's sort of the elephant in the room, and of course the elephant is the symbol of the Republican Party in the United States, so maybe that's appropriate. First thing I'll say is that the world has seen this movie before. This is not new. The world has had to deal with the United States since the beginning of this process. In the run-up to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, George H.W. Bush, President Bush, said the American way of life is not negotiable, and he insisted that the Rio Treaty have no binding targets or commitments for developed countries. Of course, that was doomed to failure. It didn't work in terms of bringing down emissions, and so we had to negotiate the Kyoto Protocol. By that time, we had a different administration, President Clinton, Vice President Gore. I'm a longtime friend and admirer of Vice President Gore, but they had no strategy to get the Senate to ratify the Kyoto Protocol after they negotiated it. And then, of course, when George W. Bush won the election because of a 5-4 vote in the Supreme Court over Al Gore, he announced the Kyoto Protocol was dead. The rest of the world begged to differ. They say, George, you're not the decider on this. We have a say. And 5 months after he was elected, they rallied with the Marrakesh Accords to save the Kyoto Protocol and go ahead with it. And then, of course, fast forward to Trump won. I was in Marrakesh on Wednesday morning of the first week of the COP when President Trump unexpectedly defeated Hillary Clinton. And the rest is history. It took him 5 months, but he decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement because he said he was elected to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. Of course, the mayor of Pittsburgh came out and pointed out how the Paris Agreement was voluntary, bottom-up, was good for Pittsburgh, not only in terms of its environment, but its economy, and President Trump didn't know what he was talking about. So here we go again. We have another 4 years of Donald Trump starting on January 20th. We don't know exactly what to expect, but we know one thing for certain. He won't take 6 months to decide to pull out of Paris. He will do it on day one. He's made that very clear. His advisors have made it very clear. It won't take legal effect for a year under the agreement, but he will stop doing anything to comply with it or observe it or try to meet the U.S. commitments under it on day one. So we know that much. What we don't know is whether he might also pull the U.S. out of the entire framework treaty, the Rio Treaty, which would be much more serious in the sense that that would stop our obligations for reporting, for emissions inventories, for any provision of climate finance and other things that were in the original 1992 Framework Convention. And of course, there's little problem of the fact that the Senate of the United States unanimously ratified the Framework Convention. Of course, it didn't ratify Paris. That was executive order, executive action by President Obama. So if President Trump tried to withdraw from the Framework Convention, there might be litigation saying you have to get the advice and consent of the Senate to do that. You can't do it yourself. And then if another president after Trump decided they wanted to get back in to the Framework Convention, they might have to seek another ratification vote in the Senate, which, if you know our Senate, getting 67 votes for anything is a challenge. So that's on the convention front. Let me shift to the domestic landscape, and then I'll come back at the end to just what's happening here. Domestically, we already know a number of things. President-elect Trump wants to reverse almost everything the Biden and Obama administrations have done to reduce U.S. emissions and to cope with the climate emergency. President Biden has taken what he calls a whole-of-government approach to the climate emergency. I think you could say Donald Trump would take a none-of-government approach. He would basically try to get the government out of the business. So, starting with the Inflation Reduction Act, which he has called the green scam, he says he would try to roll that back on day one. My own view is that it probably will be difficult for him to get the Senate and House to go along with eliminating the tax incentives under the IRA, because those are the real drivers of decarbonization. And companies all across America and around the world have made decisions to invest based on those incentives. The American Petroleum Institute says they don't want those tax incentives repealed. The Chamber of Commerce. These are not radical environmental groups. These are very conservative and frankly often anti-climate organizations because they are pumping hundreds of billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs into the United States to build battery plants, to build electric vehicles, to build solar and wind. And the majority of that investment has gone into Republican states. So you have Republicans that for a person, all of them voted against the IRA, now coming out to ribbon cutting ceremonies when there's a new factory in their state or district and taking credit for it. So go figure. So I think those are safe. What's not safe is the spending elements, the climate justice elements, the EPA elements for local communities on front lines. Those, I think, any money that has not been obligated and committed and sent out the door will be at risk of not being spent. John Podesta mentioned that yesterday in his press briefing that they have gotten, I think he said, $88 billion worth of money that they have access to. I forget if it was 88 billion or 88% of the money, but they've gotten the vast majority of the money that they can move out the door. They're trying to get the rest of it out before January 20th. Then you turn to the regulatory agencies. It's clear that President-elect Trump wants to gut regulation and the deep state, as he calls it, the administrative state. He has appointed or just announced he will appoint an EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, a former congressman from New York, who led the effort in the House to cut the EPA's budget by 25% when he was in Congress. So that'll give you a sense of what they're trying to do. They're also talking about possibly moving the EPA out of Washington to somewhere far away and hope that most of the 7,000 EPA employees will decide to quit rather than follow that move. And of course, the same thing will happen at the Interior Department, Department of Energy. Just across the board, they will take a wrecking ball to anything that tries to incentivize action to deal with climate change. They will go after the Loan Guarantee Office in DOE. They will go after the Securities and Exchange Commission disclosure rules for companies to show investors how they're at risk from climate impacts, and they will go after everything they can. Finally, let me come back before I end to talk about what's happening here, because the net impact of all of this has been analyzed. Carbon Brief has done an analysis saying they think this could add an extra 4 billion tons of carbon equivalent emissions to the world over the 4 years of the Trump administration. There's also been modeling done by the University of Maryland and others showing that even if President-elect Trump does succeed in getting the federal government out of the business of trying to reduce emissions, that the states, cities, businesses, investors, and others that are part of the America is All In coalition, which you will hear about next, I'm sure, will continue to work. And on their own, they can drive emissions down by 48%. Now, that compares to the 50 to 52% target that President Biden committed to in April of 2021 for the US NDC. The problem is the 48% is not in 2030, it's in 2035. And so they will postpone the level of emissions reductions that we should be achieving by 2030 by 5 years. And of course, by that time, we should be aiming for 65 or 70% reduction. So it will throw us off our net zero trajectory. That we know, that's bad news. The worst news would be if that gave arguments to opponents of climate action in other countries to say because the world's largest economy and second largest emitter is not acting, neither should we. And that could be a potent argument in some countries. And I'll look forward to the discussion to hear from many of you if you think that's the case in your own country. And then the centerpiece of negotiations here, of course, is climate finance. Now, in our system, the Congress controls the purse. The Congress controls spending. And the phrase goes, the president proposes, Congress disposes. Last time around, President Trump proposed to virtually eliminate U.S. international climate finance for developing countries. But the Congress, Republican Senate included, refused to go along with that. They didn't increase spending, but they didn't put through the deep cuts that Trump wanted. I'm assuming he will try again to make major reductions, if not eliminate, most climate finance accounts, and there's an open question whether the Republican Congress will go along with that this time or will resist that because they understand it's in America's self-interest to continue to support developing country efforts to decarbonize their economies and build resilience to the impacts of climate change. It's an economic issue, it's a national security issue, it's an environmental issue. And of course here, the Biden administration will be negotiating on the NCQG and the other elements of the finance agenda here in Baku, but of course the European Union, Japan, Canada, other developed countries know full well that whatever the US administration commits to here will not be honored by the administration that takes office in a little over 2 months. And so they know they are going to have to step up and shoulder even more of the load with the U.S. probably out of the game for the next 4 years. So that's the bad news. The silver lining is because of Republican opposition in the Congress, the U.S. support for international developing country assistance is nowhere near our fair share, nowhere near what it should be. It's far less than the European Union, even though the EU's economy collectively is only 3/4 that of the United States. So the fact that we are pulling out will leave a hole, but not as big a hole as other countries might leave if they pulled out. The other piece here is what will the U.S. do in terms of leadership of international financial architecture reform at the World Bank, the IMF, other fronts. We have been a leader on that because that's something the U.S. can do without congressional approval in many cases. My assumption, again, with no inside intelligence, is that President Trump will not want to be a leader in driving more climate spending by the international financial system. So let me end there and hand it back to Melanie.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alden. That's very helpful long view and also just bringing us right up to date on where the situation is. Before we continue on the mics, I should just explain that these microphones are not amplified microphones. They're here because we're live streaming and so that we're able to pick up on the live stream itself. But I would urge all of you, please, just to project so that those in the back of the room can hear us. And when we come to you, you'll have to do the same thing. So please just bear with us. This has been an innovation in the pavilions only with this year. It's taken us all by surprise. Susan, I want to come to you about this issue. Of course, you are at the lowest level of governments, the closest to the people. And there has been a remarkable shift in terms of the political mandate which has been given to President-elect Trump. So it is, yes, it's a situation, as Alden has very compellingly laid out, that one can anticipate that these changes, some of which have already been noted in the Mission 2025 documents. We don't know whether these are actually going to come to pass, because the piece of the puzzle which is missing for us, which is quite incomprehensible to those outside the US, is the dramatic nature of the win, the comprehensive nature of the electoral defeat, and what that says about where the public is. So you know what your electors want, what they have rejected, and what they have voted for. So from that perspective, if you can give us your insights into what we can expect.
Sure, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, to participate. So some context for local officials. Local government is going to be much, much, much more important than ever before. And in New York, we've seen this before. The organization, the precursor to elected officials to protect America, was elected officials to protect New York. And it's when I, as a lifelong New Yorker, really started thinking about the role of local government. We often think about federal government. We always are taught about federal policy. But it's the day-to-day things that people need, you know, water supply, waste management, roads, sidewalks. That's all your local government. And that actually isn't a partisan issue. And so when you frame the needs of your community in terms of those everyday quality of life issues, the partisanship declines. And that's really going to be essential as we move forward. Now, I'm from an area that overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris. So I know very strongly what my constituency is looking for, and that's a continuation of progressive policies, policies that will move us forward on climate, as well as a number of social issues. Even in the county as a whole, that I am one of 29 legislators, the county as a whole supported Harris. So we too have a mandate to represent our constituencies, and we fully intend to do that. Under the last Trump presidency, that was a time in my county where we elected a Democrat as the county executive for the first time in, I think, over 20 years. It was a time when our civic community was very engaged and pushed for more climate action and engagement. We got a climate action plan process started, which we have just finalized and adopted. And we have a budget of $1.5 billion. So it's not a small, relatively small for the world, but not small for, New York State. So we should begin to think about our obligation to the future and balancing priorities in a way that brings more of our commitment and financing to moving forward on those promises from our climate action plan.
So let's move directly from that ground level view. And 1.5 billion is an extraordinary amount of money, I have to say. I don't know what the size of your constituency, but for a city of London of 9 million, 1.5 is way above what the boroughs have. So you're in a good position. Alex, I'd like to come to you. And Susan, of course, mentioned the origins of elected officials of New York. You are the president of the Elected Officials to Protect America. So if you can just introduce EOPA to those who are not so familiar with it, first of all.
Thank you. And really appreciate coming back every year to the wonderful pavilion here. Elected Officials to Protect America is a network of lawmakers from the U.S. and then on the international side, elected officials to protect the earth from parts of the world. And we are committed to solving the climate crisis, protecting our lands and waters, and democracy. We're led by veterans who are elected officials from the military as well, which is a lot of how I got engaged with it when I was in the Marine Corps. A lot of us saw firsthand how climate was affecting our security. Someone tried to blow up my vehicle. Fortunately, they weren't good at it. We followed the wire and were able to catch them. We found out as a farmer had been paid to plant the roadside bomb because their crops had failed due to a massive drought. And then when we began talking to other elected officials who were veterans, they had the same story because the two things we transported the most were water and oil. And out of that, sadly, 1 out of 25 had a casualty. And so when we met other electeds who are veterans from across the U.S. and working with the Obama administration and the Truman Center, we started to form a network, and then it grew into be Elected Officials to Protect America on the state and national side. And then on the New York side, we got a little foreshadowing here with Dominic, the co-founder in the front row here, was busily working to ban fracking in New York, successfully eventually. So since then, we've grown quite a bit. We have an arm that works with the University of San Francisco, and we have a certificate in public leadership where we brings lawmakers from around the world together to focus on emotional intelligence and public leadership, reading body language and negotiation, value-based communications, empathy-based fundraising, and cybersecurity and disinformation, and climate solutions. But one of the cool things about it is they form policy teams. And those policy ideas, they compete for a prize, and then the best prize gets some funding to go do it. And it's really amazing to see what they come up with, particularly from different parts of the world. We're working with the Ukrainian delegation, and one of the ideas was a Ukraine Energy Security Marshall Plan. And so that's now happening right now. Other legislation has been passed in Hawaii, for instance, that came out of it. And then we have a media arm, which lawmakers don't really read white papers that well. But if you put us in a video, we'll show our friends. Basically, we have a production side, a news magazine that goes out to 25,000 electeds, and a book publishing arm with about 70 mission-driven books as well, followed by the advocacy and education. So working with lawmakers and being able to support them in the policy side, and then developing the 501c4 to get the right legislation through in different parts of the U.S. and planet.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very helpful introduction to have, because the nature of your constituency is not one that we come across every day. And that's why it's so important to remember that there are the veterans themselves who are taking an interest in becoming part of the political process and assuming positions of leadership as you have. I'd like to return to the theme, which is America has voted. So, of course, we heard a great deal before about the potential implications of a Trump presidency on climate action. But this is about sea change, which has occurred in terms of how people perceive their interests, their needs, and what they want their leaders to do. So what are the implications of this shift in political mandate for the work that you do?
Right. So I think you said it really well, how people perceive, and then what are the reality of how that changes the policies. It is helpful to remember that less than a quarter of the U.S. voted for President-elect Trump. Of that, and this time around, 15 million people who voted for Biden last time did not even vote. So it is a minority who have put the president-elect there. So the views that are going to come out of this presidency don't necessarily represent what the majority of the U.S. population believe in and the values that they believe. That being said, though, because he is president, he has tremendous power. Because they have the conservatives control the legislative branch, too, and the Supreme Court, there are going to be significant changes. And so with that, it's different this time, unfortunately, because on day one, they've been preparing. They trained at least 1,500 people to step into these roles the moment he gets elected. That's new, because they realized last time they were hosting job fairs just to get people to work for Trump. So it's tactically and strategically there. The partners with the American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, which was founded by the Koch brothers, right, Heritage Foundation, all those, they're working very hard and they've been preparing. With that, too, the executive orders have been pre-written. This is new, too. Most administrations don't have their executive orders pre-written by the oil and gas industry. And so you can pretty much assume that those will be stacked on his desk and just, hey, rubber stamp them when he gets there. So that's very unfortunate for the climate and, frankly, the people on the front lines of the climate crisis. So to put this in context, though, how the U.S. does matter what we do, and thinking about how the states matter in it, because of the 20, let's see, 80% of the global emissions come from 20 countries, right? And then of the, it's 40% of that is the U.S. and China, and then 3/4 of that is China and the rest of the U.S. So the relationship between the U.S. and China and how we work on climate is deeply impactful to the rest of the world. And particularly, the rest of the 40 nations that aren't those 20 are the ones that impacted the most, right? And so what happens in the U.S. is going to globally impact, frankly, the world, and hopefully for the better. And this is where the states can still make a difference. He alluded to, right, how the states have tremendous ability. And that is because if we look at the economic power of the counties in the U.S. that have voted blue, that's 71% of the U.S. economy. The top 10 most powerful economic states, of that, 7 of them voted blue or have blue governors. So when I say blue, it's generally Democratic and red's the Republicans. It's different in the UK Parliament where red is the parliamentaries, and obviously green is the Labour. So just to clarify it, I was born in the UK, so. So when we think of this context, that means that the states and the local governments still have tremendous ability to influence what can happen, right? And that's something elected officials to protect America have been doing for a while, right? In New York, we alluded to banning fracking. Dominic and the coalition organized 1,000 elected officials to ban fracking, and that had global impact because other countries looked at that, right? Because New York is the 10th most powerful economy if you were to put it as a country. California is number 4 now. I think it just overtook, is it Germany? It was 5 before, right? And it's 14% of the US GDP. Significant. And what California does on many different standards, it's not just the climate impact it has. It's the rules it can make with, say, clean cars, right? Because it's such a, well, when we think of Los Angeles, we think of cars, right? But because of the rules, the CARB standards there, it influences the entire U.S., which then influences world standards, because automakers don't want to have separate standards for different places, right? So we've seen, what was it, 2020, it was 1 out of 25 vehicles were electric sold. In 2023, it was 20%. That's a huge curve upward for electric vehicles, right? And that's primarily driven, obviously China's investing heavily in it, but the US is changing it dramatically as well. And that's driven to the leadership of California. Governor Newsom is bringing together a special session of the legislature just to deal with the fact that Trump got elected. And they'll do everything from beefing up the legal defense funds of the states to saying, hey, what policies we can have. I mean, and they also passed a climate bond to invest in it, because we know investing in our climate is investing in our economy, security, and health. So it's actually, there's actually a decent amount of hope out there when we think about what can happen. When we look at where the trajectory is going to, without the policy basically pushing it forward so that we could do it faster, because we're running out of time, right? Bloomberg was estimating worldwide 74% will have clean energy by 2050. Now, that's 26% too short, too late, but that's where the trajectory is going. So a lot of this is already in place, and that's where Trump's going to have a hard time derailing the momentum. He'll do probably everything he can, but for better or worse, the U.S. oil industry is already operating at maximum capacity, right? The LNG capacity already is at maximum, and they don't actually need to expand it because they want the prices to go lower. They already have more than enough permitting for decades to come, even though they complain about not getting the permitting. There's more than enough there, right? So what he can practically do to increase the oil exports from the U.S. is, from the economic side, not actually in the interest all the time of the companies doing it, because they're already, for the worse, at the maximum pretty much. Now, they want the messaging out there to say, here's where we're doing, and here's what, that it's cheaper energy is fossil fuel when it's not, right? Battery and storage is clearly the most economic way to go. And then we need the policies to essentially say, hey, oil, gas, you're great for your time, but here's the new wave of energy, and remove the barriers to that coming in. Now, that's where he's going to keep the stagnant. He's going to try to keep old industries that are actually not economically beneficial, healthily or security-wise, to the U.S. and world. And that's where the danger is. He'll keep an old industry there that is actually not good for the U.S. economy. But on the flip side, we have the states and the local governments, the small and mighty ones, moving forward to mitigate the impact of it, from the passing legislation, passing the rules within the states, and looking at the legal structures that we can challenge it. And then, frankly, being a leader on the global stage, too, right? The State Department now has a subnational division in it in the U.S. It took a while for us to form it, but the subnational is going to be unbelievably important to work that way. And elected officials to protect America is working to form sister cities, partner relationships between, for instance, Ukraine and others, to highlight, hey, if Ukraine can get off oil and gas right now and build 19 wind turbines in a combat zone, the rest of the world can absolutely do it, because they've shown it's the most secure, it's less expensive to make, and it's resilient from natural disasters that will go into increase from climate change and wars.
So let's hear more about that in just a second, but I want to underscore the points that you made about the U.S. federal structure where states are so supreme. Yeah, so there is going to be a very different story, and there's going to be, in the words that you mentioned, challenge and resistance that we can expect from certainly the blue states, the Democrat-led states. And I know that Governor Newsom is over here, so right, just not far from us is our partner pavilion, which is the local government and municipal authority pavilion. And actually, this presidency has really underscored the importance of the subnational. of bringing together cities and regions and provinces through the action agenda that they themselves have and what they're terming the Baku Initiative. So a lot more to be said on that front, and I hope that we will also have some contributions with regard to the role of business, because I think you'd mentioned it, Alden. One of the first things that we heard coming out of the US post the first Trump one was the emergence of We're Still In, the Bloomberg supported initiative of businesses. So lots in terms of what one can expect from leadership from the business community, but you made a very important point about Ukraine and the path that Ukraine has chosen in the teeth of being in a war zone, fighting for your survival, and of course what we have been led to believe as that this next presidency is going to be a much more insular, isolationist presidency. There's already been talk of trade war with China. What does this mean for Ukraine? So, Oleg, you are the best person to respond to these issues. So, your insights, please, your thoughts, your concerns, your insights.
Thank you very much for inviting to this event. It's very important for us to be with global community, and when I am here in parliamentary pavilion, I would like to say a big thank you for all parliamenters of all civilized countries, and for the first for American legislators for support to our country, and we now an independent country because we have help from you, and we are very interesting that this help will continue, not finished, and before this election in United States of America we were afraid because we have information from two sources, to parties, to candidates, and we had views that Democratic candidates Biden and after Harris were more open to the world, more open to the global problems, more open to the interests of USA in global community. And we had information about Donald Trump that he was more closed and more interested in American directions, and we had information, and we saw that Donald Trump had and he has business philosophy, business psychology, and it's good for America, for United States of America, because all must think about responsible area. I am a mayor. I must think about my city. My colleagues, we are with Ukrainian delegations from Zlatopil, from Zaporizhia, and they must think about their cities, but we all must think about our common country. So USA and Donald Trump, we afraid don't must think only about America, because when all country will think all about our own interests, it will finish by very big problem for our Earth, our planet, and it will be very big, very bad future for our children, our grandchildren. I like to say that we inherit our planet. We don't inherit our planet from our parents, our grandparents, but we borrow it from our children and our grandchildren, and we must think how to do better and to present our planet to our grandchildren better, not bad as we have now. And we are afraid that in the future Donald Trump and United States of America maybe don't make climate changes good for Earth. So it's very important to be good example, to be good example for all another countries, for all another civilized countries. Yes, we have Russia, we have another totalitarianism countries, and they are very difficult to contact, to be the part of civilized world. But we, and for the first United States and Donald Trump as the president must be the good example. And another countries have this example to continue and to have good actions for this. For example, I am a mayor and I have at home solar panels on my roof, and all community think, oh, it's a good idea, and we in Ukraine think more and more about this, because our energy security is very important for us, and we are very interested in solar technologies, in safety, because we know that fossil fuels today are, but tomorrow we maybe don't have it, and it will be very big problem. So
Speak up. Louder.
louder. So we must to produce more, to produce less and less fossil fuels, and when Donald Trump was the first candidacy as a president, we all saw these problems with Paris agreement. When USA go out of this agreement, we saw the situation when USA increased fossil fuels production. Maybe it's good for America, it's now good and for Ukraine, because we have another source of fossil fuels, not from Russia but from Europe, from United States of America. But for our future, it very bad situation. And yes, of course, now we more think in Ukraine about our future tomorrow, in the week, in months, because every day we fight for our independence, and we are very afraid about policy of Donald Trump and United States of America, about will be help or not will be help, or but maybe if not, or it will be less, maybe European countries think we must do something another, and it will be stronger, will be for European countries, for European Union to change and stay stronger. All that don't kill us, it make us stronger. So at the finish of my speech, I would say that page of election is in the past, as in dollar banknotes is are roads in God we trust. Now in Ukraine we talk that in Trump we trust, and we think that American nation had a good choice and in the election, and all must be good. All that we do must be for better, and I support and I believe that this election is for better.
So, thank you very much. For those of you who have just recently joined us, stirring words from the mayor of Pustomiti, Oleg Tserniak, in Ukraine. In Trump, we must trust, because there is no option. Yeah, one has to be optimistic and hope for the best outcome. So at this stage, I'd like to please open this up for discussion. You've got some brilliant, very insightful speakers here on the panel. So I'm going to hand over the mic. please remember to project and please introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Well, before we
Alden?
go to the first question, let me just comment on a point Alex made. I totally agree that California and other states provided tremendous leadership during the first Trump administration, but you should remember, he tried to go after them and preempt their ability to set standards on electric vehicles and to drive other things. He has indicated he will do that again. And of course, the courts are much more conservative than they were during his first term, including the United States Supreme Court. So I think California, New York, other states are already taking very seriously the threat of the incoming Trump administration to block them from providing the climate leadership they did during his first term. I just want people to be very clear-eyed about that. This is not going to be easy.
That's a very good point. And as you're underscoring, the administration is much better prepared this time round. They were preparing for a win. They've had a resounding win. They know what they're going to be doing on day one, as many of you have said. So I saw some hands up. The gentleman in the front and then over there.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm a journalist with The National. I want to build on a question that was put to John Podesta yesterday, which was what Team Biden can do in its remaining time to Trump-proof its record. In particular, is there anything it can do here at COP to do that?
Let's take two or three more, and then the lady over here.
This question is for Alex. I'd just like your thoughts on why 15 million people didn't vote in this election that voted for a blue turnout this time. Just why is that? What are your thoughts on what that says about how the American people are feeling?
And I'm Mary Coyle. I'm a senator from Canada, and I'm interested in the USMCA, our trade agreement in North America, which will be renegotiated next year. It first negotiated under Trump, and those state and other level relationships were critical to us getting some advances there. There's an environmental chapter. There are various environmental parts of that have been really important. I'm curious what you might think on that and what kind of advice you would have for Canadians as we enter into a new era of our relationship with our most important trading partner.
Thank you very much. You'd like to
Well, let me start
first.
on a question about what the Biden administration can and should do before it leaves office on January 20th. First of all, as I said, they need to try to get as much of the money they have available to them under the Inflation Reduction Act and other authorities out the door. John Podesta said yesterday they've gotten the vast majority of those funds committed. They need to get the rest because, as I said, President-elect Trump has made clear he will try to claw back any unspent monies that the administration hasn't done. They should try to advance finality on some of the regulatory fronts to the extent they can, although I should say they're already within the window where the Republicans in Congress could use the Congressional Review Act to try to overturn any regulations they promulgate now. They should try to move forward work by the Export-Import Bank to stop funding fossil fuel projects overseas, working with other G7 countries through the OECD. They should try to issue the initial findings on the needs determination they're doing on new liquefied natural gas export facilities. They put a 15-month pause on that to review whether that's still in the public interest. So that's another thing they can do. And of course, I'm eager to hear from my state and local colleagues what they can do that would be helpful to them before they leave office. Because one of the things we have to do in this process is to get national governments to change their policies, their tax policies, their regulatory policies, information standards, et cetera, to empower subnational governments, or as former California Governor Jerry Brown likes to call them, national governments, to do more. Because that's where the rubber meets the road in the U.S. and most other countries. That's what drives most of the implementation of carbon cutting activities. And the more that national governments can do to incentivize local and subnational action and business action, the better.
So who'd like to pick up on that state question and not to miss out on the relationship with Canada?
So at Elected Officials to Protect America, this is something we've been keenly aware of for a time as the possibility that another president could try to undo it. And we have a task force working with the Department of Energy and other agencies to get the Inflation Reduction Act funds out there to the Justice 40 communities and others, working with lawmakers from across the United States. And it was always in the back of the mind that, hey, that we need to prepare. So a lot of this has been in the works already to essentially have secondary entities take larger chunks of the funding and be able to get it out there was one of the strategies, right? But on a very tactical side, one thing in Congress and the Senate they can do is you can hold and you can work to block the most extreme appointees. The Republican Party was very good at this to make the life of Democrats' appointees very tough. And I think it's going to be, particularly when it comes to the Department of Defense and other places where it's key that he's going to put people there who are ideologues, to essentially hold that process to get the most moderate or not extreme person in there who actually believes in the Constitution and not being sworn to a person. The other side here is ensuring that the funds get to the states in time, right? I think they will be dedicated to doing that. The irony is about 70% of a lot of the funding has been going out there, going to red states. They're not telling you where it came from, but. And then you have very interesting situations where the state governments don't actually know the full breadth of what they can do with all the funding too, because actually there's a lot of flexibility in some of the funding and how they can partner with private sectors. So the more they've partnered with the private industry sector to do this stuff, it insulates it, I think, from some of the attacks that the incoming president might be doing.
Thanks very much. Susan, I'm going to come to you next. I'm sorry, we're going to be running out of time very soon. If you can help us bring things to a close and see if you can pick up the questions from the senators also.
Sure, as best I can. This is my third year in county government, so always growing and learning more. But I've been asking our county executive to invest strongly in solar. Solar is really a no-brainer. Over time, it will drive revenue back into the tax base. So why aren't we moving faster? Maybe now is really the time. The second thing for our county is the biggest source of emissions is from our heating. And we have very old housing stock. And we should be looking at and moving forward with projects for thermal networks. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, as things develop, we might get more attention on that particular issue. And I know New York State as a whole is partnering with Quebec, right, for the transmission of electricity down to help us meet our state goals. And again, I just reiterate the power of local government from a historical perspective. We only banned fracking in New York because our local elected officials fought for that and asked for that and pushed that need up to the state government. And then they acted on behalf of our communities to keep us safe. And we're just going to need to take that approach again.
Thank you very much. I can see that there are a couple of other questions. I'm going to take one last one, please. The gentleman in the front.
I think this is probably best suited for Alden because you've been to a lot of COPs. All of them? Almost all of them?
I missed the one in Marrakesh in 2001 because Senator Jeffords asked me to stay in Washington and help pass a four-pollutant power plant bill in Congress. And so that's the one I missed. But Marrakesh, I went to the second one in Marrakesh in 2016, which is where I woke up the morning of the third day to find out that President Trump had beaten Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so, you know, the U.S. has played sometimes a helpful role, sometimes an obstructionist role. And maybe as Americans, we tend to overestimate our importance on the global stage, or maybe not. What is your sense over the years of how meaningful American governance is in these talks? Not directly, but sort of the sense, the mood that pervades based on what's happening in the White House and in America.
Well, I said before you came at the very beginning, I think the world has seen this movie several times and they're getting rather tired of our shtick. You know, the U.S. likes to say it's the indispensable nation, but I think some countries here are getting ready to dispose of us and not be bound by the ups and downs of our electoral cycle. I said that President George H.W. Bush insisted that the original Rio Treaty be entirely voluntary because the American way of life was not negotiable. Vice President Gore and President Clinton didn't have a strategy to ratify Kyoto when they negotiated it, and then George W. Bush pulled us out. Trump pulled us out of Paris. It's kind of like, if you know the Peanuts comic strip, it's kind of like Lucy yanking the football every time Charlie Brown runs up to kick it, and he falls flat on his back. And the world is tired of doing that. I think they've decided they want to move on without the United States, and we're encouraging them to do that for the next 4 years to make clear that multilateral climate action and diplomacy is alive and kicking, that it's essential, and that they should work with elements of America that want to join in meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, the subnational leaders to my left and others around the country, and not try to wait for the federal system to catch up.
Yeah, I would just add that it's the subnational is where the opportunity is. And yes, the world has seen this story before, and the world also knows that the subnationals stepped up last time with C40 and the other organizations, including EOPA, to bring together the local elected officials to who can make a real difference. Because I think earlier, I don't know if you're here, but 71% of the U.S. counties in the U.S. That are blue make up the powerhouse of the economy, right? So that 71% of the counties is the economic engine. 7 out of the 10 states are blue. That's where the economy is in this, and that's where the emissions also too. So
just to bring things to a close and to bring us back to where we are in Azerbaijan, a country which is tucked right between Russia and Iran. And the geopolitics here are, of course, fascinatingly intriguing, because the theme of this session has been America has voted. The rest of the world has not voted, but the rest of the world is taking note. But also, the rest of the world is moving to its own drumbeat. And I think this is a very important point for those who are coming from the US, that other countries have their own agendas in this. The train has left the station. And if you look at where this country is going, this country is using COP29 as the opportunity, the catalyst, to reshape its economic destiny. And they understand it better than most countries because the first oil wells were pumped not too far from here in Absheron. And where you see that where is the money coming in to capitalize the decarbonization of an economy like Azerbaijan? It's not coming from the United States. Where's it coming from? It's coming from Saudi Arabia. It's coming from the UAE, which are the biggest plays that they have made in this country, is not to drill, baby, drill in the Caspian. It's to grow solar in this country and wind in this country. So these are the new plays in a part of the world that I think America has looked through only one prism, and that has been conflict in the Middle East. These parts of the world are telling their own story, and I hope that you'll come back to the Parliamentary Pavilion to talk more and to engage with this part of the world in particular, because there is a very compelling story. And Ola, as you were saying, from Ukraine, it's countries who are in the teeth of the most difficult geopolitical dynamics, who understand that the way forward in your case is in Trump we trust, and for countries like Azerbaijan to create their own destinies. So on that note, thank you so much. We've had a full room. We've had a fantastic set of speakers. And please do come back, but please join me in thanking them all for their contributions.